here are my three reasons, my three leading reasons why ordinary folks ought to care about redistricting. The first is electoral competitiveness. You know, one of the things that frustrates people is that in so many parts of our state, people will say, well, the outcome of the election is a foregone conclusion. You know, I live in a district where, you know, one party has always held the seat and seemingly always will. And so there are Republicans living in Democratic districts who have no hope whatsoever of ever having a representative from their party. And similarly, there are Democrats living in Republican districts who will never have a chance to have somebody from their party representing them in something like the State Assembly or State Senate or the U.S. House of Representatives. It's because the way the districts have been drawn. The vast majority of districts in Wisconsin are politically lopsided. And they are, as a result, not remotely competitive in terms of election results. When you look over the last 10 years, if you look at the state legislature, I mentioned that there are 132 legislative seats, 33 in the Senate, 99 in the State Assembly. The whole Assembly is always up for re-election every 2 years. So every 2 years, all 99 seats are up. In the Senate, they have 4-year terms, so one election year, there will be 17 of the 33 seats up for election, and the next 2 years later, there will be 16 of the 33 Senate seats up for election. So what you've got is, depending on the election year, either 116 or 117 state legislative seats that are up for grabs. In the last 10 years, the number of competitive elections in those districts, and I define competitive elections as those with an outcome within a 10-point margin, where the margin of victory is within 10 percentage points. When you think about that, 55-45 doesn't seem that close. I mean, a lot of people consider that a blowout. But the figures I'm going to give you, that's with elections that fall into that 10-point margin of victory. In the last 10 years, the number of competitive elections for state legislature has ranged from a low of 10 to a high of 29. Out of 116 or 117 elections, depending on the year you're talking about, the best, most competitive year, you saw 29 of those districts that produced outcomes within a 10-point margin of victory. The vast majority of those districts in Wisconsin, again, it is a foregone conclusion. It is either overwhelmingly Republican or overwhelmingly Democrat. And so since 2000, not surprisingly, state legislative incumbents have been reelected 95% of the time. In 2000, incumbents went 102-3. 102 wins, 3 losses. In 2002, incumbents were 89-6. In 2004, 91-4. Incumbents won 91, challengers won 4. In 2006, 97-9, and in 2008, 99-3. A lot of people looked at 2008 and thought it was a pretty intense competitive election year. And the thing is, Wisconsin, if you listen to the national pundits, if you listen to the political experts, they talk about Republican red states and Democratic blue states, and they'll say Wisconsin's a classic purple state. We're not overwhelmingly Democratic or Republican. And indeed, Wisconsin, when you think about statewide elections here, we had Tommy Thompson serve as our governor for 4 terms, a Republican. But at the same time, we were electing Herb Kohl and Russ Feingold to represent us in the U.S. Senate, 2 Democrats. So they were all running statewide. They were appealing to the same voters, and yet these very different political beasts ended up winning these elections. This is a state that produced Joe McCarthy, that sent Joe McCarthy to the U.S. Senate, and it is a state that sent Gaylord Nelson, the founder of Earth Day, to the U.S. Senate. So this is a state that you can see as sort of politically schizophrenic. I mean, we're very independent-minded people in Wisconsin. We can elect Democrats, we can elect Republicans, and indeed, when you look at the outcome of presidential elections, when you look at statewide elections, the margins are very, very close. You know, this is one of those classic battleground states. That's why all the presidential candidates come here, because Wisconsin is one of the few states that is totally up for grabs and either party could win. So you would think in this very purple state that legislative districts would look sort of purple. That you'd have a lot of districts that are sort of 52-48 or 51-49, but instead we only have a handful of elections that even get within 55-45. It's a purple state, but the districts are bright blue or vivid red. That is because of redistricting. That is what redistricting can do. And if people want to shake up the system, and if people want to infuse new blood into the state legislature or into the Congress, if people want to just get their elected officials' attention by putting a scare into them at election time, redistricting makes it exceedingly difficult for voters to do that because there are so many lopsided districts. And you saw the numbers. I mean, incumbents have an incredible winning percentage. They are very difficult to take out, yet you see poll after poll that says the approval ratings of our state legislature is in the 20-some% range, 30-some% if it's a good moment for them. Congress, again, you see approval ratings in the 20-something%. So you'd think that voters would be throwing people out if their approval ratings are that low, and yet their re-election rates are 95% on average over the last decade. That is what redistricting can do.